to be the best 1% or 0.5%, like to be up there with Lauren is the current world record holder. Megan is typically right behind her. Michaela Norman, who had done CrossFit, like there's lots of girls to be in the top, that top 1% or even the percent of the percent, like you're going to have to sacrifice so much.
Good day, everyone. Coming to you live from a secret woods location to bring you the interview I had today with Kristi O'Connell. Just last week we had Mal at her first HYROX, and today we've got Kristi and her first HYROX. We'll talk about how she prepared for it. We'll get into some zone times and more. Hope you enjoy it. Away we go. I'm sure I asked you this last time we talked. What do I refer to you as? Are you Aramo O'Connell? Are you Kristi O'Connell?
Kristi O'Connell. That's my legal name. Yeah.
Okay.
I started as Kristi Aramo. I went Kristi Aramo O'Connell, and then I slowly transitioned. So Kristi O'Connell. Yeah. We've been married for about 5 years. It's time.
Okay. Well, listen, people go every different way with it. So, and I think I actually when I watched your video and Tommy, the announcer, said your name. I'm like, that's probably right. But sometimes still people will register under a different name for their races. So, cool. So I'm glad we're talking. And also maybe you could explain, I think last time I spoke with you, it was CrossFit Polaris. And I think you've had a slight name change. And I noticed the branding on your social and on the sweatshirt you're wearing. So you want to quickly kind of tell people what that is?
Yeah, so HYROX Training is our brand. So my husband Patrick and I, we own CrossFit Polaris. We still have the affiliate. We still do CrossFit, but we've rebranded it as HYROX Training, which is what we do at the gym. So HYROX Training expands well beyond CrossFit. It's, I've done half Ironmans, marathons, half marathon, like all the different types of fitness domains, and that's what HYROX Training is. There's a program that's more isolated accessory program. There's the lift run, there's the CrossFit, people wanting to go further in CrossFit, a more advanced CrossFit program. Like there's all these different types of fitness on there, a minimal equipment. And so that's what it is. And we do variations of that at the gym, but this just allows for us to be able to reach so many people all over the world that have just loved our programming, because we've been programming for our gym for many years. And so now we have the app, and we're actually getting ready to release a brand new HYROX app coming up. So we're really excited about that.
Okay. And what is the nomenclature of HYROX?
If you're not familiar, so we love being outdoors. We love the mountains. HYROX is actually this really cool alpinist mountain goat, and it can just traverse like the coolest stuff. So like straight up walls and just go through the hardest of challenges. And that's something that both my husband and I, we like rock climbing. Like we just feel like we can relate to those challenges. And so we thought that was just a really cool animal. And we also like the name that just fit with all the hard work that our athletes and our community puts in on a daily basis.
So the last, let's say 6 months, when you how far ahead do you plan when you're like, okay, this year, maybe I want to tackle another half, or, hey, I'm going to put HYROX on the calendar this year. Like because you don't have the quote unquote games season anymore, since you sort of stepped away from that, how do you even approach? And I know you do a lot of it together, right? Because you run your company together and you guys like do all the video content together. But how do you personally look at what you're going to sort of attack for, say, is it a quarter? Is it a year?
Actually, no, it's kind of, I just try to keep myself fit and feeling good and just try to take on challenges as they come. So the HYROX was honestly pretty last minute. I think we were driving home maybe in January from visiting our family, and I was like, I think we should do something fun this year. Like, let's just go try out another fitness domain that we've been wanting to do, and we have the freedom to do so. So I think that's just like what people maybe don't realize. So having trained for the games for so many years and having been so structured and so everything, 2-3 sessions per day, hours and hours, missing all these family events, having to have that structure, you want the freedom to be able to use this fitness that you work so hard for. And I just do the things that I enjoy, and I want to just feel good. So I do follow programs, but most of our programs are 60 minutes. And so I train 60 minutes a couple times a week. I'd say more than probably 5 to 6. I always take a full rest day. And
how dare you take a full rest day?
So important. But that's just what I've been doing since I got out of CrossFit, because I needed to find balance in healthy amounts of exercise and spending time with my family and just resetting, and all of a sudden like getting myself out of those old routines and habits to do the things that I love to do, which is all these other things. We've got a couple things that we're looking at. So there's like a trail half marathon. I'd like to do a 50K. Get back on my bike, cycling, things like that. And I just try to keep myself fit and then do a small build into them, and just rely on the fitness that I've built. But the main goal right now is just to feel good, like to feel mentally clear, to my body not to hurt, to not wake up every day and feel like I'm in a huge hole, because I spent years there and I don't want to be there anymore.
The hole, can you describe the hole?
Oh gosh, where you just wake up and you feel like you're just sinking into your bed. So CrossFit Games training was really challenging, and it's always like the balance of, have I done enough or should I be doing more? And I always lean towards the side of, I liked to do a little bit more just to know that I covered all of my gaps. And not everybody trains that way. It's just how I felt comfortable. And so there are just days and times where, it's towing the line of overtraining. And there's just so many different skills and pieces. And then for me, being the smaller athlete, I had to spend so much time on strength, which my body just gets a little bit more beat up being under the heavier weights so often, that I feel a lot better if I'm, in the zone 2 or in the aerobic zone than when I am under really heavy loads quite often throughout the week.
How much was the time domain or the mental stress of debating stepping away and then like relief of, oh wow, I can kind of move on with my life now?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have had that question. It's interesting. Like I always wanted to, I was always kind of aware. So I felt like I was very lucky in the sense that I was a college athlete. So I got to experience D1 college athletics for 4 years. Then I stepped out and I was auditing for KPMG, and then I fell into CrossFit. And so I didn't start CrossFit for it to be a sport. I felt like I had my entire sport life when high school and college. And then I started to love it. And so I wanted to step away when I felt like the fire and I no longer enjoyed what I was doing. I definitely even think I pushed that a little bit longer than I probably wanted to, just because I felt like I continued to get fitter. And then you're like, okay, like let's go back, let's see another year. Like maybe we can do a little bit better. And then after the 2022 season, I actually ran the Columbus Marathon just because I was like, I want to just do something different. And my husband ran his first half, and I was just really happy with how I did. But honestly, the feeling from that was just more satisfying than walking away after the CrossFit Games. And that's when I started to recognize and realize and reflect on, like, I think I'm just pretty much done. I didn't announce until March of the following year because I wanted to give myself plenty of time. I still did Wadapalooza to make sure that I felt really good with that decision. And it is hard. It was bittersweet. Like we put up a video on our YouTube channel and you can see how emotional, just because one chapter is closing, and just because that chapter is closing doesn't have to be sad, but there was a lot of emotion that came with it, but also at the same time relief. So it wasn't something that I really struggled with. I could kind of feel at peace when I started to recognize those feelings. And then when you say it, it's very emotional, but at the same time, you can just appreciate everything you've been able to do and all the opportunities that you had.
Well, I think people, we, the audience, let's say the consumer of sport, right? We are very selfish. So when people retire, quote unquote, early, right? And I'm not saying you did, but just thinking about what's like, people are getting so much smarter about their bodies, right? And then the mental health piece is massive, right? So I just talked to Mal, and when you started CrossFit, nobody was doing that. Nobody was saying, you know what, like this is actually fucking me up as a human being. So I'm going to put your little competition down for a minute because I have a life outside of, like, no one was saying that. So it's huge. And I think about Simone Biles as kind of one of the first, like, wait, you're an Olympian? How dare you? Right. And so now we live in a time where it's okay to go, I'm going to listen to my brain and my body and maybe try to do something else. And the other piece is like, she's not even saying forever. She's like, just for now, this is it. And I thought that was great.
Yeah, I think you have your best interest at your heart. And you have to remember that is like, you don't have to do it for anyone else, and you really shouldn't be doing it for anyone else. And if that's what you're doing, that can be a really tough life and a really hard life to wake up to and live every day. And I'm not saying that I enjoyed every second. There's very, very challenging pieces, but at the same time, like you should still have somewhat of a fire and drive within yourself, and it's okay to take breaks. And I think what she's doing is incredible, and I think it's setting a great example for, you know, the next generation coming up. So you're not, your identity is outside of sport, and I think that is the biggest piece that some people can kind of get lost and wrapped up in. And I mean, I think that I experienced that when I went through the last chance qualifier at the CrossFit Games back in 2021. I didn't qualify out of the sanctional, and I had to do the last chance qualifier. And I'll never forget walking into our affiliate the next day. My husband was like, I cried for like 2 days. You know, I'd qualified 6 years in a row. Like, I felt like my identity was starting to become that. And the best thing that ever happened to me was not qualifying. I walked into the gym the next morning, and in my 8 a.m., 9:15, they were so excited. They were just so excited with how I performed. I'm like, I didn't qualify, but they're like, you're still the same person. Like, we love you. Like, it doesn't matter if you're going or not. And like, that for me was a very big eye-opening experience. And I think that a lot of people can just wrap up their identity within that sport. And, you know, we still have our identity outside of sport, and having a community with CrossFit or HYROX to support you along the way is just a really important thing.
Yeah, and I think for those of you listening, it's like we can all go there, right? I mean, I have a friend who's a doctor, and I mean, I don't want to get into this, but he had that taken away from him. And it's like, well, who am I if I'm not a doctor? Or basically any job that you have, or who am I if I'm not a mom? Who am I if I'm not this? Who are you? Oh, I'm my kid's dad, right? Like, I went from being Joe's kid to Jackson's dad, you know what I mean? And that's who I am. And so I think a lot of people can relate to it if they stop to think about this like identity, like outside of who I am if not what I do. And there's this whole conversation of like, you know, we do that. They say that Americans do that. When you talk to someone, you say, what do you do? And I've been that way for a long time, where I probably will get to it, but I try not to make it the first question. I try to talk about something they are interested in. But then when you do stuff like this, people ask us what you do, and you like, I mean, I bet early on for you, people didn't even know what CrossFit was. If you were like sitting next to someone on a plane, you're like, well, we're just in the gym a lot and we exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I still think sometimes it can be hard to explain to people like everything that is entailed in a CrossFit competition, but absolutely. So, and I think that's a great point, is everybody can kind of get wrapped up in one thing, but just remembering like the things that you also enjoy to do, and that there's more to you than just that one piece, whatever it may be.
So, you know, obviously you and I have been talking, and I appreciate you taking the time, because obviously, you know, when you're showing up or Mal's showing up, it's newsworthy and people want to know what's going on. And, you know, I try to be very respectful of that. So I'm like asking you questions like, hey, are you going? And you seemed very casual about it. You're like, hey, just checking it out. Not a huge deal. Like, we're just going to go have some fun, which I totally understand. But my question is, did you, and you said you didn't do any kind of sim, but I know you have kind of a run lift program, like you have a hybrid training program. So, you know, what you said at the beginning, hey, I just have an overall base of fitness, and then I might tweak a little bit leaning into it. So did you push some sleds? Like, what did you do in your work? What did you do in the weeks leading up?
I didn't push a single sled. I actually panicked Monday before the race. My husband and I was like, Pat, I haven't pushed a sled. Like, do you think we should push a sled? Because it's also been winter here. He's like, you've pushed thousands of sled in your life. Like, think
And
about
remind
it.
the audience where you live again. Where do you live?
We're in Westerville, Ohio,
Okay.
northern Columbus area. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I've pushed sleds. I'm like, but did you see the weight on the HYROX sled? He was like, Kristi, you've pushed sleds at that weight. Like, it's fine. So just like to put my mind at ease, Monday night, we went over to the gym and threw on a couple. And I think I did 4 like 12 or 25-foot pushes just like outside in our parking lot. And then like a couple pulls. And that was it for sled. So I never ran with them. I never did anything compromised. Like the hybrid program that we have is really like some lifting. So tempo front squats, it kind of hits everything. So a lot of the accessory work that I would do in CrossFit to keep myself healthy with some of the strength movements, but there's absolutely no Olympic weightlifting and no high skill gymnastics, because those are the two things that really beat me up the most. So it'll be like a press, a squat, and a pull, right? To keep our hamstrings strong, for our quads, for our knees, keep all of our tendons and ligaments and joints. And then I also believe that we should work our upper body, especially for people who are running. Like, we want to make sure we stay strong. And then you'll see like a conditioning piece, and that might be something in the gym or it might be a running piece. So I was running about 3 to 4 days a week. And in CrossFit, when I was training, I always only ran 2. So I just added in, like worked up to those 2 extra days, and they were pretty easy runs. But I didn't do any sim. I didn't do wall balls. Like I would try to keep my workout still in that 60, maybe on Saturdays we'd go up to 90-ish minutes. Like if I did a 45-minute and then some strength work with it, or like an easy run. But honestly, like my husband, we used to get to do CrossFit together, and then he switched into coaching me. So it became more of like a coach athlete relationship. We didn't really train together anymore. And so I originally asked him to do doubles because I was like, I really want to go check this out. Like there's lots of running. I've heard amazing things. Like we should do it. And he was like, okay. And then he was like, I don't want to run with you. Like, no, let's not do this. So let's both do singles and see how it goes. I was like, okay, sounds good. So we really just signed up kind of on a whim to be the guinea pigs for everybody in our gym that was asking us about it. Like they're all curious, like they're seeing it on social media. I was like, yeah, we picked the reason we picked Houston. We know nothing about the season. I actually thought it was the weekend after the Open, and it ended up being the last weekend of Open. So that was my bad. But that was the reason we chose it. And also we can get a direct flight from Columbus. So that was the only reason that Houston was appealing, was it was like the easiest, closest, like it kind of worked out with the Open. So we could be there with our gym to support them and then go do something after that was really fun. And so yeah, the training, like I'm very happy with how I did. I had a couple people be like, I thought you could maybe run a little faster. Just like having seen what I'd done previously when I was training for the games, I was like, well, I was just kind of having a little bit of fun with it. So yeah, we threw wall balls in. That's a normal piece. I didn't really do that many walking lunges. We did throw burpee broad jumps in because the standard is just a little bit different, like understanding where we can put our hands. So like trying to get the hang of like not reaching. That was a little bit different for me. So just trying to make sure like I knew standards. But other than that, like we just kind of did our normal thing.
Can we get nerdy on the stats? Because I know people like to do that. They like to really break down kind of how the actual race went.
Sure, I don't even have a clue. So you're welcome. I was like, yeah, I haven't even.
All right. Well, good news for you. HYROX is very great with this is actually in real time. So if someone was home watching you, they could actually follow the race. But post race, let's go to this is HYROX, and you just type in HYROX results, and it's pretty simple. And then you go to the season, and then you drop down to Houston, and you go HYROX Pro. You are a woman. Bam. All right.
Wait.
So here you are, 104.37. And then look at this, all your splits. Here's what time you got on the rocks in. Here's the zone. So let's just break it down. So the first run, which I think is usually a little short, was 3:39. Were you like, did you go out? Did you feel like you went out too hot? Did you feel like you went out exactly as you wanted?
I just followed the girls. Like I was making sure that I was just gonna, because I couldn't remember like how many times you had to go around the thing. And
That's a tough one.
ran past it on one, and then turned around and ran back in. Like I was just confused. So then I started counting on my fingers every single time, like holding my fingers while I was running, because that was like the most confusing thing for me, was trying to remember where I started and in. So no, I think I just followed them. I did not feel like I went out too hot. I felt very comfortable. I was just, yeah, had no idea what was going to happen like 50 minutes into the race. So I was trying to actually be relatively conservative there. So it's faster than I would have anticipated, but it did not feel fast at all at the time.
And then did you have your ski was a 4:32? Did you have like I'd like to have this many calories and do about a 4 minutes? Did you have anything, or was it just like, let's just see how this feels?
Yeah, I was just breathing. I was honestly kind of looking at the monitors to the left and to my right, trying to figure out like what do people ski in these races. Because obviously I've done lots of hard skiing, I've done lots of slow skiing, like we ski a lot in CrossFit. So I just also know that I talked to several friends who have done this, and they're like, whatever you do, don't kill yourself on the skier. So I was just kind of cruising there thinking like, let's just not redline from the start. And that way, hopefully we'll be able to finish this thing. And so I was just very casually kind of just trying to figure out what range to be in by looking at the people next to me.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple ways to look at it. People definitely, it's one of those things where you can't win it in the first 3 stations, but you can lose it. And you can, right? So it's just like a marathon, right? Can't win it in the first mile, but you can definitely lose it. So the sled push, and by the way, this is the place just for your category, right? So if you're for your wave, or you're for the women, you're the first one of that group, right? So 227, again, was it just like, this feels fine? Did you have any kind of sense of, let's go straight through, let's stop each way, let's do you have anything around that?
I didn't usually how I do things is you never want to hit red lines. Like, especially when I'm coaching my classes at the gym, I'm like, all right, you guys, whatever we do, like, we always want to stop a few reps short. Like, you never, once you hit red line, coming back from red line is a very challenging thing. I knew coming off, I hadn't practiced like tired legs into that run. So I was really curious. I've done triathlons in the past, and it kind of reminded me of like when you get off your bike and then you start running, it's like all of a sudden, like, whoa, I have jelly legs for a second.
Right.
I would say that's how I felt like in the rock zone. I was just kind of like, okay, well, let's just slow down here for a minute. But yeah, I just pushed it. I take a break when I felt like I needed a break. I kind of was just looking around to see how fast people were moving it. Again, just kind of relying on my field to help me gauge, maybe how much effort I should be expending or not expending. Because obviously, I think most of them, I talked to several people who had done like 10 plus HYROXs. So I was like, okay, this is cool. They have a good understanding of how this race will work. I trust my fitness. Let's just kind of, blend in with everybody here.
So there's a fair amount of noise, there's a fair amount of cheering, and the announcer is talking quite a bit. Were you aware, like, okay, I'm starting to quote unquote break away? And at that point, did you start to think about winning? Because I know you didn't go there to do that, but I mean, clearly
No,
winning a race feels good.
no, I don't even know. So like off the ski erg, I think it was like in because the thing that's cool is they filter you down the line. So you can actually see like at each station. I
Right.
had no idea they were going to do that. So I was like, oh wow, like I'm like towards the middle to the end. Okay, that's cool. I'll just stay here. The sled, I couldn't really tell. I think there was quite a few girls that came off in front of me, but I made up a bunch of ground because I remember running off and there were still people pushing. So I was like, okay, this is good. And I like to chase, like I enjoy chasing in a marathon or things like that. Like I think it's really fun. I actually prefer not to be in the lead. I think it's really fun to have goals of like, okay, I'm going to try to work up to that person. Okay, I'm going to try to work up to that person. And so
Right.
that's kind of what I did when I came off that sled push. I was like, all right, there's somebody in front of you. Like, let's just try to get to them. And so that was just kind of how I kept myself occupied. But no, on the sled push, I like no sense of like this could be like winning this thing.
How about by the time you got to say burpee broad jumps?
The burpee broad jumps were really fun. I was when I came off.
Nobody calls those fun, but okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. I never have gotten to do just like a long stretch down and a long stretch back in a competition. Like that's just not something we do in CrossFit. Like we do burpees over the bar, we do burpees to target, burpee pull-ups, but like I've never in competition done a burpee broad jump like that. And so I could see after doing it, I'm sure people have lots of different strategies based on their body type and their body size and things like that. But yeah, after that one and I came out, I kind of peeked back behind me and I was like, oh, like, okay, I think that I can, try to hold pace and let's just keep running here and see what happens. So that after the fourth station, also having halfway done, I was like, oh, maybe I could be like top 3 in this race. Like, this is kind of fun. So I still was never really at any point think win just because I knew those 100 wall balls were at the end.
Right.
And
But
I
if
don't.
you but you were aware, like, so like the farmers, you're now, I think you can see your opponents like coming back on the farmers. So even then, what were you thinking, any of that stuff?
Yeah, I was just thinking like, hey, don't let him catch you. Like you can work hard too. Just at this point, like, it's like how hard do you actually want to work during this? And so I think like obviously having competed in swimming as a college athlete, having played soccer, having obviously competed at the CrossFit Games, like I just naturally have a competitive instinct. So pushing myself as hard as I can is always fun. But yeah, then once you start to get that lead, like nobody wants to lose it. So then at that point, I was like, okay, let's just try to hold on to this the best that you can.
So coming off the lunges, how were your legs feeling?
Yeah, that was hard. The sandbag was not heavy. Like I've done lots of heavy back rack lunges in CrossFit. But it was just 3 minutes was longer than I expected, or 3 minutes was actually about the time I expected, but it felt longer. So then I knew I slowed that run down just because I could kind of see who was behind me and where they were. So I knew I had like a little bit of time to just recover was the goal into the wall balls. And that's kind of on that last run. I was like, okay, let's just shake out your legs. So that way you give yourself your best chance, obviously on a leg driven movement, which is a wall ball, and try to go in that feeling fresher.
So you talked about the automatic thing. Now that was actually the first, it might have been the very first time we had those. Maybe they had them in a different country before, but I'm pretty sure this was the first time we ever actually had those. Um, and you said you're used to going way above the line. Can you explain, like, I don't understand the logic of why they no rep you either for that. Like, to me, that makes no sense.
So I think they said this was the first time they were testing it, and they did. So it's my fault. They told us you have to hit the sensor. And, I'm just out there. My brain's a little bit tired. We call it WOD brain in CrossFit, where you're just kind of like, I just know what I'm supposed to be doing, but not totally thinking. And then I'm like, okay, 100 wall balls, which is one of my least favorite movements, and you're done. So I just started throwing it, and it just honestly, I think muscle memory. So two things in CrossFit, the women pretty much always throw to 10 feet. So 9 feet is lower anyways. So I was throwing to the 10 foot, and then two standards in CrossFit, the middle of the ball has to be clearly above the line. So I always the worst thing is if you get a no rep, especially on some workouts, it can be extremely costly. So I would always try to make my standards as clear as possible just to avoid getting a no rep. So I started doing that same thing. And it was like, no rep, no rep, no rep. And they came in like, you have to hit the sensor. And so I understand because they're trying to help, I think take out any, inconsistency maybe, that they want you to hit that sensor, and then all the judge has to do is watch for your depth, which I think is a great thing. And I actually think it's very cool. And I think the screens are also incredible because it ties the spectators in. So the spectators have an idea of like where you are. And so the whole idea is awesome. I do know that like in sport, people say accuracy is a big thing. And so clearly I was not very accurate because I was throwing well above the line, even when I was trying. So I do think just having practice and like if people put X's on their wall ball targets and like they work on having that precision and having that accuracy, it will be a very cool thing. I just was a little bit wad brained and tired and just like throwing my ball to make sure I thought it was like well above the standard. And that definitely backfired a little bit at the start. Mentally
Did
too.
did
Oh
did
no.
did you go in? Did you go in once you got there in your mind where you're like, I'm gonna break just before I red line. I'm gonna break at 40, like anything like that?
I had zero plans for the wall balls. And
Even
I
as
know.
you approach them?
Yes, I was like, let's just start throwing. And usually what I do is I try to throw like if I'm like, okay, 10. When I get to 10, I usually mentally I'm like, okay, do you actually need to set it down or can we get a couple more? And like that's kind of how I break up my sets. And I've always done that in CrossFit, but I've been typical. So it's very different. Like we've had a couple workouts in CrossFit where it'd be like 120 wall balls into 120 calorie row or something like that. And I will break mine up into 6 to 8 sets, and I'll have friends that go 2 sets, and our times will actually be very similar because I just like to try to take planned breaks and move a little bit quicker instead of the longer, slower style of a wall ball. So I did know that I was probably going to have more breaks than maybe what people typically see from the people doing HYROX, just because that's the style I like to use. But I can also see how at the end now moving quicker is not better because your heart rate gets higher. So it's just different from anything I've experienced. And I wasn't sure how they were going to feel only because I knew it was going to be, 65 plus minutes later that I was doing 100 wall balls. And that's not something I've ever tested in CrossFit. So typically the workouts are 15 minutes when you're doing those 100 wall balls, or they're broken up. And it's not after 60 plus minutes that you've been working that now you throw these 100 wall balls. So I knew it was just going to feel different. And so I really had no expectation and just figured I'd chip away.
So in the video, you talked about how you learned that once again, there's an opportunity at a last chance qualifier.
Yeah.
Uh, so the way it works is, if people are listening to this from the CrossFit side, is they've actually, it's a really new sport, right? So how do we have people qualify? And it was just on times. And then there were these massive differences in courses and sled weights, and because they're all over the world and there's newer weights and all this stuff. So they attempted to straighten this out by saying you do need a time to qualify for something called a major. And then if you place top 5 in the major, depending on who's already making it, you then can make it to the world championships. And then after that, 2 last chance qualifiers. And so now that's the point we're at. We've already had all the majors. So there's 4 slots for the women and 2 for the men, or whatever it is. So you can go to Anaheim, which is in a month, or I want to say Copenhagen, but they were just in Copenhagen. There's 2 last chance qualifiers. So it's been a few days. Have you thought about it? What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, it wasn't on my radar at all. I until we got there and they're like, oh, like you could totally have a chance. So I'm not sure. I talked to my husband about it. We'll look at, I think it's March now. So they said it's in May in California. We're in Ohio. California is pretty far for us. But I also think it's fun. So it would be really fun just to see, like, maybe with one under my belt, if I could straighten things out a little bit more, like, would I have a chance? I don't know. Give me a little bit more time to have some understanding and maybe prepare just a little bit better for it would be kind of cool. So we've talked about it, but we have made no decisions. We're going to kind of see just how the next, 4 to 6 weeks go with other stuff that we've got planned. And then we'll kind of make a last minute decision if we decide to go. Yeah.
Right, so it is Cologne. I'm sorry, I was confused because they were just in Copenhagen, not Cologne. So those are 2 different cities. So Cologne is, just to let people know, is April 13th, 14th, and then HYROX Anaheim. The gainful HYROX is May 19th. So those are the 2 dates. Those are the choices for people who want to still go to the HYROX World Championships in Nice. Again, you are competitive by nature, and you're moving on with one specific type of competition, which is CrossFit. But this is something that you could excel at, right? Like
Uh,
even for marathons, right? You could get really, really fast in a marathon, but you're not going to win Boston, right? Like that's not the point. But this is something that you could compete at the highest level. So what are your
yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately like I was joking with my husband, like we just put on YouTube, and I think there's part in there where I'm like, Pat, I told you I wasn't looking for a new sport, because I genuinely, like, I feel like I'm turning 35 next month. Like I feel like I've been competing at a high level for a very long time, and like what I don't want to do is just kind of take our life into another sport where I'm like just completely locked down. So the beauty of HYROX is I do believe that to be the best 1% or 0.5%, like to be up there with, I think Lauren is the current world record holder. I think I saw Megan is typically right behind her. Michaela Norman, who had done CrossFit, like there's lots of girls to be in the top, that top 1%, or even the percent of the percent, like you're gonna have to sacrifice so much and you're gonna have to be so dedicated. And probably even that top 15. So that is just kind of what I have to ask myself, is like, how much am I really willing to put into it? And I don't think that I have had enough time or come to the conclusion, but I do love the thing about HYROX is, one, the community was super cool. I love the community aspect, and that's ultimately what we went to try out. And then 2, I like that it will fold into the kind of fitness that I'm doing right now. So, I love the runs. It's 5 miles of running, so you don't need to be able to run a marathon. And so I think that's a really reasonable amount of running, broken up into 8 1,000s that anybody can train for and do. There's my puppy Mila. And so I really like that, and I think that folds really well into like the kind of training I like to do. And then the 8 stations that they chose, like they don't beat you up. It's how hard and how far can you push that capacity. And then you can do the strength training obviously to help, but I have such a strength background that I think it would fold really well into, the current training that I do with IBEX and the current hybrid program, and, some of the CrossFit style workouts that I still do. So I'm not saying I'm saying no, I just need a little more time to process and think about it.
Okay. Now, you did end up doing a relay.
Yeah.
Which your husband was unclear on the rules, which is great. because it's good to jump into something and then suffer miserably, right, with your friends.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think, one of the things that they say. Because when I first started it, I thought this is great. And the fact that there is no complex movements, there is no gymnastics. Every they say fitness for every body, right? And I said, I still think those sleds are really heavy. Meaning, I joke and say so I come from the obstacle side, as you know, right? I interviewed you first when you were in the Spartan Games. And so if you do a Spartan sprint, you might fail some obstacles and it might take you a few hours, but you'll get it done, right? You can slow jog it, you could fall off an obstacle. You cannot not do the sled, right? Like you've got to just get it done. And it's it's I just thought maybe it's too heavy, maybe you should lower it a little bit. And they said, well, do a relay then, or do a doubles or do a relay. And I think that's going to help some people. What do you like your gym members? What do they want to do when you hear
Oh,
them talking about it?
yeah, absolutely. They have a ton of interest. Like they're all like they can continue doing CrossFit, but they can also do this. And I think that's the biggest thing is like they have a ton of interest in it. And I think the relay is a really cool option so in my thoughts, the relay is a very cool option where people could really drill down and focus on whatever station they think they're going to do during the relay to get really comfortable and confident with it. They also don't have to run the full 5 miles. So running that full 5 miles is a little bit overwhelming for people, which you will do during doubles. So they kind of give everybody a little bit of an option, which I think is just beautiful because you can split the work if you're worried about the sleds and run the full 5 miles. So, or you could do the relay, not have to do all of the stations, and then you also don't have to run the full 5 miles. So they just have something for everybody, and it was a really good time. The relays were super fun. And it kind of reminded like I was a swimmer, like you had relays, like you swam your leg like I was a breaststroker, and then I'd tag off and the freestyler went in. And so that made it super fun and it makes it feel like a team and you have that camaraderie. Or with your doubles, you stay within an arm's length of your partner, and that's also a team. You're working hard together. And so I think that there's tons of options for everybody to be able to do it.
Yeah. So to clarify, and what your husband didn't know is that everyone does 2 runs and 2 stations. So you
Yeah.
run, do a station, run, do a station. And you can divide those any way you want, right? You can divide them like evenly, like you do stations 1 and 4, your friend does 2 and 5, or you can go back to back if you're super strong with the sleds, let's say, which some people do. And you only are running twice. For doubles, you and I can have you do all the wall balls if I don't feel like it, or I can do the whole farmers, or I can put it down and you can split it. But yes, you do in fact still have to do all the runs as a double. So that's like letting people know what the differences are. What's interesting, really interesting, is they did their first race in, I want to say China. It could be, I think it was Hong Kong, and they had more relays than individual because
Oh,
the
wow.
because
That makes sense.
well, like they're a smaller people, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of people under 6 foot there than there is here. That's just science or just whatever it is, right? So
Mhm.
they're coming at it a different way. Whereas people here, they really want to see what their time is, and then like, hey, maybe I'll do a relay for fun. And I think that's the other part too, is that hey, listen, you're going to be there. You've probably traveled um, from a different city, or at least you're going to spend the day there. Why not like do something in the morning, get something to eat, go do the relay with your friends in the afternoon? And I think that's why you felt that community vibe and this, lack of separation from the top 1% and the regular folks, because we're all kind of doing it together.
Yeah, and absolutely. So I think there's just plenty of opportunities for all of the fitness and like you said, relays, doubles, single, whatever you want to do, there's something for everybody. So I think it's really cool.
How far a flight or a drive is from where your gym is to Chicago
Chicago's about 5 hours for us of a
on a
drive.
right?
Yeah, you can get a really quick flight. It's usually an hour or less. And I think that's the one everybody's looking at doing because we don't have any. But I mean, Columbus is a pretty big fitness city. Like we have
Yes.
Arnold, we have Rogue Fitness. Like maybe one day they'll consider putting one here just because I feel like Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania, like everything can just kind of come into Ohio, and it's a pretty simple drive, but I don't know how they choose locations, things like that. So I do know that people in Ohio tend to really love fitness and like these areas, especially in CrossFit. It was always a really popular region. So maybe one day we'll have one closer than Chicago or New York.
Yeah, so Chicago has been there even a couple times a year, but I think it'll go back to once a year. But for those people listening that live in the Midwest, that's probably going to be listen, I live in Atlanta and we haven't had one yet. And I'm really bummed out because I met those guys their first year pre-COVID, and they're like, oh yeah, we're definitely coming to the South. We're coming to Atlanta. And then the closest is Miami, which is,
No.
8 hours. Like DC is closer and other places are closer. So just sort of letting people know that live out that way that Chicago probably is the closest. And yeah, it would make sense to make it part of just make it part of the Arnold. Like, hey, go that weekend.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. There's so much going on that weekend. It's so fun. But yeah, I guess, I mean, it seems like it's continuing to grow, and it is really interesting just to see how much interest people have. Like when we got back, I was curious if people were gonna wonder, and we have tons of people running half marathons, and they're doing like the 150-mile races together, like with teams. It's like people like fitness. And I think that that's really what HYROX is combining for people is, some people who like the heavier stuff get to push the sleds. Other people who like the running get the running. So there's a little bit in there, and it's all not super technical. So the barrier of entry is not super high for people.
All right, cool. Well, I'm glad we got to talk this morning. You want to tell people where to go for all things IBEX or all things Kristi and Patrick?
Yeah, all things. So first, our YouTube channel, it's actually under Kristi Aramo O'Connell. We need to probably change that. But if you look at YouTube, we actually just launched a behind the scenes video of our first HYROX. My husband and I both did it. My Instagram is at Kristi Aramo. So KRISTIERAMO. That probably needs to be changed soon. And then IBEX at IBEX_training. And you can check out ibextrained.com. We've got all of our programs on there, and yeah, we'd love to have you part of the community.
Thank you so much for watching. There's a little bubble that's going to pop up, a little square. It's going to tell you what video to watch next. If you're new to this channel, go watch that. Follow us for more fun stuff. Love you, miss you, mean it. I've got to run.